Hi everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy. Today we're going to be talking about tropes in the horror genre. So this week, in the spirit of Halloween, we're talking about horror. In the last video, we talked about how to write horror, the different techniques of writing horror, what goes into crafting a really effective horror novel. Like we've done with past genres we've covered, today we're going to be talking about tropes in the horror genre, and like in past tropes videos, we're going to talk about two that you probably want to avoid, one that can be used well but also has some pitfalls, and two that I think should be embraced. As always with tropes, they're pretty subjective. Different people like different tropes, and like in a lot of these videos, the two that I've chosen to avoid I think should be avoided because they can be offensive. The tropes that I like are just the tropes that I like, and different people like completely different tropes. So there is a pretty subjective aspect to this. So the first trope that I think should be avoided is probably one of the most just historically problematic tropes in horror, and it's using mental illness as plot twist or disability as horror. And I'm kind of lumping these together because it's really the same principle that goes into these tropes. So this is a very ableist trope that really should just be avoided unless you really are writing from your own experience and have something nuanced that you can actually contribute here. But in general, it's pretty offensive and ableist to be making horror out of real disabilities or real mental illnesses that people actually experience. You can totally write psychological horror without using mental illness as a plot device or plot twist. You can write body horror without using disability as an aspect of the horror. The second trope to be avoided is in a similar vein, and it's using other people's cultures as horror. Now, if you want to write horror based on your own cultural background, that's great. It's pretty offensive to be using someone else's culture as horror. One really common example of this trope is the Native American burial ground haunting trope, which is pretty common. It's pretty offensive to say, oh, your culture is terrifying and therefore horror to me, an outsider of that culture. But if you want to use your own religion, culture, beliefs, etc., as horror, then be my guest. That would be pretty cool. Now, the one to be careful with is zombies. And the reason I picked zombies as the one to be careful with is because I think it's very love it or hate it. Some people hate zombies, they're just over zombies. Other people adore zombies. Personally, I like zombies. I think zombies are cool. Tons of people are really over zombies. Now, obviously with a lot of love it or hate it tropes, I think it really just boils down to there are going to be people who hate this trope and are not the target audience, and there are people who love it and are the target audience. But I think in the case of zombies, it comes down to, can you find a new approach to this trope? Yes, there are people who just hate it and people who just love it, but I still think zombies can be done really, really well if you can find some kind of new angle or element to it. Otherwise, it can get repetitive. It really is just the same, oh, we have to kill hordes of the undead as usual. I think there's a reason why zombies have spawned so many different books, shows, movies. It's something we've seen time and time again because there's an appeal there. And if you can find a new angle on that trope, it can really pay off. So the first trope that I personally love is found footage. You see found footage in horror movies like the Blair Witch Project, the Paranormal Activity series, but you can also use found footage really cleverly in novels. Whether you want your horror novel to be a series of letters or emails or text messages or newspaper clippings or a diary. I recently read this horror novella, Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, by Eric LaRocca, which is told through emails and messaging transcripts between the two central characters and shows how their relationship devolves into some pretty horrific things. I think found footage is such an ideal form for horror because it really plays into that idea of abandonment. You know, it's one thing if a character is telling a story themselves, we have that kind of reassurance that, you know, they survived, they're here to tell the tale. But as soon as you wrap up horror in a found footage, it has that kind of terrifying abandoned quality. Like, this was just discovered, we don't know what happened to these people, we have no assurance that the story will end happily. In fact, it probably didn't. I think it can create a ton of suspense, and it can be a really fun way to play with form. The final trope that I really like is making the mundane horrifying. This is when a piece of horror is able to take something that really would never be horrifying and make it terrifying because of its implications in the story. The best example I can think of this is actually from a horror movie that I just watched, Dark Water. There's this red bag that appears throughout the story. It gets thrown away and then it comes back, and it's just appearing over and over no matter how much the main character tries to get rid of it. And you start to become terrified of this red bag, something that otherwise isn't scary at all. It just has like a cute design on the front. But the movie is able to literally create suspense and fear and horror about a bag. You know, the character just puts something that they're holding down, then they turn around, and when they look back, it's gone, or it's been moved, or it's been knocked over. Sometimes these little details in our lives can be some of the first signs of the supernatural in a horror movie. Yesterday, I heard a loud crash in my kitchen, and I was the only one home. When I went out there, the whiteboard on our windowsill had not just fallen over, but it was completely on the other side of the kitchen. I have no idea how it got there. It wasn't windy out, so I don't know how the wind would have blown it over. There were also things that were in front of it on the windowsill that it didn't knock over. I still haven't figured that one out. I think it must be a ghost. I'm a little scared of my whiteboard at the moment because it might be the sign that my house is haunted. Using just day-to-day things that otherwise would not be terrifying at all as the first signs or signals of a haunting can be so brilliant because it makes us fear something that otherwise we would never be scared of and would never associate with terror. So if you can actually make the reader afraid of those things, it can be really impactful. Those are 5 horror tropes that you can use well, be careful with, or maybe just avoid. I would love to know what your favorite or least favorite horror tropes are in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos from us. We've got new writing, editing, and publishing tips every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time, bye.